Now, those last two championships were very, very impressive, and they were possible because of something really important that happened earlier this decade in artificial intelligence, which is that it started to work. It really didn't work up until about 2012, until Jeff Hinton, a British computer scientist, and his colleagues in Toronto managed to apply a branch of statistics called machine learning to artificial intelligence. And in particular, they revived an old system of AI called neural networks, artificial neural networks, that's now called deep learning. And it was able to do this because of the phenomenal amount of compute power that we all have now. I mean, I'm sure you all know that the smartphone in your pocket is a supercomputer. It's more powerful than a Cray supercomputer 2 or 3 decades ago. It's been said for quite a while that the smartphone in your pocket has more compute power than NASA had at its disposal when they sent Neil Armstrong to the moon. And that's true, but apparently now a modern dishwasher has more compute power than NASA had when they sent Neil Armstrong to the moon. Now, it isn't going to send you to the moon, obviously, but you get the point. It is not completely wrong. It's a bit of an oversimplification to say that artificial neural networks, deep learning, works in somewhat similar ways to the way the human brain works. They're more simple, but there are similarities in the architecture. And it isn't an oversimplification to say that machines now learn, and they are creative. AlphaGo, the system that beat Lisa Doll at Go, wasn't taught how to play Go. It was taught how to learn how to play Go. It taught itself how to play Go, and it learned by playing itself millions of times over. As a result of deep learning, machines are now better at recognizing faces than you are. And that's really impressive because facial recognition is a human superpower. We are really good at it. We're so good at it that we see faces in places where there aren't faces, like on the moon. It is in the process of overtaking us in speech recognition. It can recognize speech better than we can in a noise-free environment, and it will soon be able to do it in a noisy environment. And they're catching up on us with natural language processing. And in a few years, they'll be much better at all of these things than us. And that could be a tad awkward because those are the things that most of us rely on to earn money with. So what's going to happen in the next few years? Well, first of all, smartphones are going to get sexy, really sexy. That's a smartphone being sexy. Siri is a bit of a joke at the moment, but in the next few years, Siri is going to get serious. And it's probably going to be a while before anybody seriously falls in love with their operating system, like Joachim Phoenix did in one of my favorite AI movies, Her. But it will happen. Probably even more important is the arrival of self-driving vehicles. I like to call them autos because self-driving vehicles is just too cumbersome. These are going to be ready for prime time. Well, they're actually ready for prime time now. Google just announced that it's letting members of the public use its self-driving vehicles I think in Arizona. And they've been testing them for millions and millions of miles, obviously, in San Francisco and Silicon Valley. So in the 2020s, these things are going to populate or going to penetrate the existing base of cars and trucks and vans very quickly. And that's going to be a great thing because it'll save 1.2 million lives a year. That's how many people we kill each year with cars because humans aren't very good at driving cars. We get tired, we get drunk, we get cranky. We're sending humans to do a machine's job when we send humans to drive cars. So it'll be a good thing. It'll change the way cities work. Parking will be completely transformed. Traffic will be much lighter. And journeys, as you can see, will be much more pleasant. But it won't be such great news for people who are professional drivers, and we'll come back to that. All of this is possible because of something that I imagine everybody here knows about, which is Moore's law. First noticed in 1965 by Gordon Moore when he was working at Fairchild Semiconductors. He noticed that the firm was putting twice as many transistors on a chip each year, he thought it was then, as the previous year. It has gone through a few iterations, and there's a great volume of argument about whether it has stopped or whether it's going to stop and how long it's got to run. Boiling it down, it means that machines, computers, get twice as powerful every 18 months. And bottom line is, that is going to carry on for some significant time. We're not yet at the point where the chips are setting fire to themselves because they're bunched too closely. And there are all sorts of technologies which will perpetuate it, not least quantum computing, which until quite recently I thought was a very long way away. I mean, it's one of those technologies which has always been 20 years away because that's a nice, safe period of time. But there's a lot of money going into quantum computing because it looks like it's working. You probably know that when you double something every period, you get exponential growth with a factor of 2. And that's what exponential growth looks like. That's a curve showing the number of transistors on Intel chips over the year. There's a lot of misunderstandings about exponential growth. People talk about being at the knee. You are always at the knee with an exponential curve. It always looks like the past was fairly dull. We quickly habituate and get used to the change that's happened in the past, and it always looks like the future is very exciting or scary, depending on how you look at it. As an illustration, because we're not very good at bearing in mind the power of exponential growth, as an illustration of it, if you walk 30 normal steps, you will go about 30 meters. If you could walk 30 exponential steps, so that your first step was 1 meter, your second was 2 meters, your third was 4, and your fourth was 8, and so on, you would go to the moon. In fact, to be accurate, your 29th step would take you to the moon, and your 30th step would bring you all the way back, which tells you two very important things about exponential growth. One is it's very, very powerful, it achieves a lot, and it's also backloaded. It looks for a long time like nothing much is happening, and then suddenly a lot happens quickly. So I think that our already most powerful technology, artificial intelligence, subject to Moore's law, we are always just at the beginning, is going to give us these two singularities this century. You can tell that I'm a recovering strategy consultant. I'm almost over it, but I'm still a bit addicted to 2x2 matrices. And the technological singularity I've put as the most important because it's an existential threat. If we get technological singularity wrong, we will probably be wiped out, or worse. But on the other hand, if we get it right, our future is almost unimaginably wonderful. We will probably become godlike. The economic singularity is not so important. It's probably not an existential threat. If we get it wrong, it will probably just throw us back to the Middle Ages or maybe throw us into some really unpleasant fascist state. So it's not quite as important, but it's more urgent because it's coming sooner. So these are all part of the third great wave of change washing over humanity. The first was the agricultural revolution, which started in different parts of the world independently around about 10,000, 15,000 years ago. The second was the industrial revolution, which started in 1712 in the UK. And then the third is the information revolution, which started somewhere around 1960 in the States. It is not the fourth industrial revolution. I hope none of you here use this awful term. It's people who say this is the fourth industrial revolution. It's the sixth time the fourth industrial revolution has been used, and I can't remember what all the other five were, it's too boring. Calling artificial intelligence and the rest of the growth of computing, the information revolution, calling it the fourth industrial revolution seriously understates it. The impact of the information revolution will be far greater than the impact of the industrial revolution. So Klaus Schwab, who's a very clever man, and he founded the World Economic Forum, and he runs those Davos conferences, so he's a clever man. He's wrong about this, but he was right about this. Because of the information revolution, excuse me, I've got a cold, there has never been a time of greater promise or greater peril. He's right about that. So let's start with the important one first, the technological singularity. This is when we create an artificial general intelligence, an AI with all the cognitive abilities of an adult human. And because computers can be improved, twice as good every 18 months, it goes on to become a superintelligence. There's a lot of debate about how quickly that might happen, but probably within weeks or months rather than years or decades. It would become 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times smarter than Einstein. We would become the second smartest species on the planet, which is a position currently held by chimpanzees. And the thing about chimpanzees is there are a few thousand of them, and there's 7 billion of us, and their future depends entirely on us. They don't have any say in what happens to them. But they have one saving grace in that they don't know that. If and when we create a superintelligence and we become the second smartest species in the planet, our future will be entirely dependent on it. And we will know it. So it'll be an interesting experience. Now, some of you will be thinking this is just Hollywood science fiction. And that's a good excuse to put up my 5 favorite Hollywood movies about AI. But in fact, there are 2 routes to superintelligence, and at least one of them will almost certainly work. So the first way is to carry on doing what we're already doing with AI, to continue to develop more and more sophisticated and powerful forms of weak or narrow artificial intelligence. It's called narrow AI because it's super intelligent at one thing, like playing chess, and completely useless at anything else. We would need to achieve some breakthroughs, some conceptual breakthroughs to get from here to AGI, the way we're going, and we don't know what they are, and we don't know how long they might take. So we don't know if this is possible, and we don't know how long it would take. But unless you think there's something magical going on in the 3.5 pounds of gloop inside your skull, unless you think there's a spirit, which God puts there, then eventually it should work. There's no reason why it shouldn't. The other route almost certainly will work, again, unless there's some magic going on. And the other route is reverse engineering a human brain. And it's known as whole brain emulation. What you do is you take an existing human brain, ideally from somebody who stopped using it, and you slice it really thinly, and you scan each slice down to the molecular level, and you work out in perfect detail what's called the connectome, to rhyme with genome. It's the wiring diagram of the human brain. And you instantiate that in a computer. You create a perfect model of a human brain inside a computer. Now, if you can do that, it will do braining. It will do what brains do. And what brains do is they create minds. They create the experiences that we all have. And presumably, if you did it that way, it would be conscious. One of the interesting things about if we do it the other way, we don't know if it would be conscious. It might be super intelligent, but unconscious. This is a really big job. I mean, I don't want to make light of this. There are 96 billion neurons inside your brain, and each of them is connected to 1,000 others. So this is a seriously big job, but it's an engineering project rather than the blue sky physics project. And the best estimate is that it will probably take 50 or so years, 50, 70 years to get there. The other route might get us there quicker. I was chairing a conference in London recently on AI, and the head of deep learning at Uber, who knows a thing or two, said he thought it would happen in 25 years, which I thought was terrifying, because we're not ready for it. So, superintelligence is almost certainly coming. We don't know when, but 50 to 70 years sounds like a reasonable time frame. Now, until recently, nobody was taking this seriously, except for Ray Kurzweil and a few other loonies like me. But then in 2014, an Oxford philosophy professor called Nick Bostrom published this book, Superintelligence, which I highly commend. It's a really good book. It's quite a hard read, but it's very thorough, very rigorous. And it provoked what I call the 3 wise men moment, when Stephen Hawking, Elon Musk, and Bill Gates sang a song in close harmony, which was that strong AI, superintelligence, is almost certainly coming, and it will either be the best thing or the worst thing that humanity has ever experienced. Now, journalists are pressed for time, and if it bleeds, it leads. And so the result of that was this guy appearing in the newspapers for a year. We had the great robot freakout of 2015. And a consequence of that was that Google got huffy and stopped talking about artificial intelligence in public, which wasn't very helpful. Now, the Skynet scenario where Terminator comes from isn't impossible. If we are unlucky enough or stupid enough to create a superintelligence which hates us, then our future is probably very short and nasty. But a more likely threat is that we create a superintelligence which is indifferent to us. It doesn't hate us, it doesn't love us, but it thinks it's got a better use for the atoms that we're made of, or it thinks the composition of the atmosphere on Earth should be different, or the gravitational constant should be different, something else which is a little inconvenient for us. But the most likely threat is that somebody inadvertently asks a really stupid question, a really stupid favor of the superintelligence. Nick Bostrom famously has his paperclip analogy, but I like the Mickey Mouse experience in Fantasia, or King Midas, who made the mistake of asking what was effectively a superintelligence to turn everything he touched into gold. So there are some very bad things that could happen with superintelligence. It is an existential threat, an existential risk, but there's an equally enormous upside. And DeepMind, the company in London that created the system that won Go, has this very good two-step mission statement. Step 1, solve intelligence, create artificial general intelligence. And step 2, use that to solve everything else. And by everything else, they really do mean everything else. Poverty, war, and death. I said at the beginning that we really ought to do something about death. Every day about 150,000 people a year get it, and it's invariably fatal. And we lose a library every time somebody dies. We should be putting a lot more resources into solving this. And of course I'm saying this partly because I'm a lot older than all of you, and it's nearer for me. Whether we're going to get the good or the bad outcomes, we can't stop it happening. Relinquishment, putting it all on hold until we figure out how to make it safe, isn't possible, because the competitive advantage of owning a better AI is compelling infinitely to any company, any government, and of course, above all, any military. So there's no way to stop it. And there is a ton of money going into it. I laugh every time my government, the UK government, says, we're at the forefront of AI and we're going to put 150 million into AI. What cobblers? These people, 150 million buys you a small team of AI researchers. These 6 companies, between them, spend more on R&D than the whole of the UK. Now, I know the UK thinks too highly of itself, I get that, but still, these 6 companies spend more than all of the companies, all of the government, and all of the universities in the UK. So these are the 6, and there's another couple, Uber is one, American AI giants, because these companies are now AI companies. They have got the memo, they've drunk the Kool-Aid or whatever, they know that AI is their future. Google was always an AI company, and the others are all now AI companies. And here are 3 giant Chinese AI companies. Baidu, you probably know, is China's Google, Alibaba is its Amazon, and Tencent is a telephone and ISP company. And here's a list of all the great European AI giants. I think this is a problem. I think this is a serious problem, and I don't think we've got a solution to it. Humanity's greatest challenge this century, and quite possibly ever, is to make sure that the first superintelligence really, really likes humans and understands us, knows what's good for us, which we actually don't. So that's a big problem. Fortunately, there are some very smart people working on this problem. There are 2 existential risk organizations exactly where you'd expect to find them in the States, MIRI in California and the Future of Life Institute in Berkeley, and 2 in the UK, oddly, in our oldest universities, one in Cambridge and one in Oxford, and they have broken the rule about British understatement. The future of humanity, yay. And fortunately, Google and the other AI companies have got over their huff about all those pictures of the Terminator, and they started to talk to each other and to some extent talk to the rest of the world openly and honestly about AI. They don't, my impression is, they don't still get how risky this stuff is. They partly get it, and they're willing to talk about it. So that's a step forward, and this Partnership on AI, oddly named organization, is a group of the leading AI companies talking to each other, funding papers about AI safety. So, using the traffic light warning system of red, amber, green for how risky each of the 2 singularities is, the technological singularity gets an amber because it's an existential threat. It's seriously risky, but we are paying quite a lot of attention to it. So an amber for that. Now let's look at the economic singularity, which is about automation. Now automation is not new. We've had it since before the Industrial Revolution. First example of it I could come across was when Queen Elizabeth I in 1602, something like that, refused a patent to an English inventor for a machine which automated part of weaving, and she refused him that patent because she said if he introduced this machine, it would put some of her subjects out of work, which was remarkably foresighted of her. The poster child for automation is agriculture. In 1800, 80% of all people who worked in the States worked on farms. By 1900, that number was down to 40%, and now it's down around 1%, because of mechanization, that form of automation. Now, that wasn't too much of a problem for the humans who worked on farms. There was a real disruption, and there was real hardship for a lot of people. But in the long run, there are seats all over the place down here if you want to come and sit down. In the long run, the humans had something else to fall back on. They had their cognitive abilities. But it didn't work out too well for the horse, because all the horse had to offer was its muscle power. And so when mechanization replaced the muscle power, the horse had nothing else to offer. And in 1900, there were about 25 million horses working on farms in America, and now there are effectively none. So 1900 was peak horse in the workplace. Question is, are we heading towards peak human in the workplace? This is a chart from a report by a couple of Oxford academics a couple of years ago, 2013, I think. Frey and Osborne is often quoted. It's guesswork, like anything else in this space is. They were as rigorous as they could be, and they've been criticized, I think, unfairly for pretending to be more rigorous than they could be. I don't think they did. Anyway, they said that in a couple of decades, around half of all American jobs could be automated. They didn't then go on to estimate how many of those jobs might be replaced, and that's the game that's going on at the moment. Because what's happening now isn't mechanization. I mean, there's still mechanization going on, but what's going on now is cognitive automation. As I said earlier, machines recognize faces better than we do. They recognize speech better than we do. They will soon do natural language processing better than we do. So they are replacing the skills that we all use at work, cognitive automation. And of course, it doesn't look like that. It's a huge, great bank of computers somewhere very cold or somewhere with very good air conditioning. Machines have unfair advantages. It's very unfair. They don't get drunk, they don't get tired, they don't get cranky, they don't fall out with each other, and most importantly, they get twice as good every 18 months. You have to keep bearing that in mind. Exponential growth. A lot of this seems implausible, but not so much when you bear in mind exponential growth. We have had cognitive automation in the past. When I started work, there were secretaries in most offices, and I'll bet many of you have never met a secretary. That's a chart of the most common job title in the States in 1978, and in about half American states, the blue states are secretaries. So secretary is the most common job title in about half American states. And now it's just in New Mexico for some odd reason, and a couple of eastern seaboard states where it's the most common job title. Secretaries got automated by laptops, by desktop computers. But they were okay. They went on to find other jobs in offices and in shops. And much to be grateful for, women went on to do more senior jobs than being secretaries, which is great. The most common job in most American states now is truck driver. That's the green states. And what is going to happen to them when autos arrive? Now, self-driving cars will spread across the passenger car sector reasonably quickly. We'll be quite keen on saving lives and making journeys better, so it'll happen reasonably quickly. But it will spread really fast in the commercial sector. And that's because a professional driver contributes a quarter to a third of the cost of the operation. A truck driver, a van driver, and a taxi driver, they're a quarter to a third of the cost. So companies will be forced to replace them as soon as they possibly can. And they will be able to pretty quickly. So it seems to me, we don't know this is guesswork, but it seems to me likely that by 2025, an awful lot, maybe most, professional drivers will be out of work. And it's not clear what they will do. Currently, they get paid, many of them get paid a white-collar salary for doing blue-collar work. There just aren't any other jobs like that. So there's going to be a lot of very angry truckers. And it isn't just truck drivers. There are machines which can do quite a lot of a doctor's job better than humans. There are machines which are doing quite a lot of the lawyer's job better than humans. Same with journalists, and of course, in factories and warehouses, robots are getting much more flexible, easier to program, easier to tell what to do, much safer to be around, and much cheaper. So cognitive automation and mechanization are going to sweep across the economy quite quickly now that artificial intelligence has reached that threshold and as it gets better and better. It doesn't matter if you're a barrister or a barista. It doesn't matter if you're white collar or blue collar. AI is colorblind. I don't know if that joke works in Polish. Now, the economists say this is all rubbish. The economists say that this is the Luddite fallacy. Ned Ludd was an English person who probably didn't exist, but got blamed for breaking a machine early in the Industrial Revolution, and then some people took his name as they went around smashing looms, automating weaving machines. The British government responded with characteristic British reserve by hanging the lot of them, so it suppressed that resistance pretty quickly. But it does turn out that if the Luddites were making a sophisticated economic thesis, which of course they weren't, but they were wrong, because automation has not in the past caused lasting unemployment. Automation has raised productivity, which has raised wealth in the economy, and that's created new jobs. And so the economists say that that is going to happen in the future as well. It happened in the past, so therefore it will happen in the future. And they say that we will work in partnership with computers. So they say the important thing for us to do now is to get really, really good at working with computers. But they don't explain why these rapidly improving computers aren't going to take over the bits of the job that we do. The women in this audience will probably have experienced the phenomenon of mansplaining. Wait till you get a load of botsplaining. Economists point out that having AI around means that huge amounts of work are surfaced that become possible, which weren't possible now. So we can all carry little gadgets around which track all of our health indicators, and that can be sent off to an AI, which can diagnose us. So doctors can treat symptoms as they first appear, rather than when they're about on the point of killing us. And so there's a lot more work can be created for doctors. And that's true, that will happen in the short run. But then, of course, in the long run, the machines will do all the extra work as well. The economists then say, well, machines can't care because they're not conscious, they don't have empathy, and we all need to be cared for, so particularly as we get older and we get ill. So humans will all do caring jobs. I don't really believe in an economy where we're all nurses and therapists. I mean, maybe it's possible, I struggle to believe in it. But also, experience shows that humans are very happy to be looked after by machines, because machines are infinitely patient. If you're an elderly patient, you can tell a machine the same joke 100 times every day, and the machine just doesn't care. So the last line of resistance for the economists is the magic job drawer. They say, we'll open the magic job drawer and lots of new jobs will fly out. So we'll all become virtual reality architects or something. And they say, this is what happened in the past. Pretty much all the jobs that you do in this room, your grandparents could not have imagined you doing. The farmer who got shoved off the land by a tractor could not have imagined that his granddaughter would be a user experience architect at a web firm, because there was no such thing as the internet or the web. However, that's not actually what happened. The bar to the right represents all the jobs we have today, and back in 1914, 80% of those jobs existed. We've only really added 20% new jobs. And a different study showed that 6% of jobs have been added since 1990. What happened between 1990 and today is obviously the web was invented and promulgated, and the web has turned everything upside down. I mean, the world of work is totally different now from when I started. And if that's only created 6% of new jobs, it really isn't plausible to believe in this magic job drawer where all these new types of jobs are going to fly out. I mean, it could happen. We don't know. But it doesn't seem very plausible. So I think the economists are guilty of the reverse Luddite fallacy, and they should know better. We know that past performance is no guarantee of future outcome. And I think they're dangerous. I think we have to face the fact that it's possible. we have to face the likelihood that within a generation, many, many people, very possibly most people, possibly almost everybody, will be unemployable. And our challenge is to make that a good world, which it should be. A world where machines do the jobs, they do all the boring stuff, is a world where humans can get on with the important business of life, which is learning and playing and having fun and exploring and socializing. That is a good world, and that's the world we should aim for. There are some problems, of course. Some people think that humans will struggle to find meaning in a world without jobs. I think this is utter nonsense. I think retired people and aristocrats are two groups of people who show that a life without jobs does not have to be a life without meaning. Aristocrats, I mean, some of them went and ran empires or ran their estates, but most of them didn't work, didn't do jobs. And they weren't famous for dying of existential despair. So I don't think meaning is the real problem. And I frankly refuse to believe that being a delivery person for Amazon or being an actuary, and I apologize if there's any actuaries in the room, is the summit of human meaning. I just don't think that's the case. The problem is income, and it's a serious problem, because I think if we get to a jobless society, we're going to have to decouple income from jobs. And quite frankly, we don't know how to do that. Some people think the answer is universal basic income. I did a post on this yesterday, and I've had about 400 replies so far. On the political left, people have been very, very cross with me because they love universal basic income and they think I'm a horrible capitalist because I'm attacking it. And on the right, people think I'm a terrible communist because I want to give money away. Universal basic income has three strands. It's universal, it's basic, and it's an income. And two of those three are pretty bad. If you're in a jobless society, well, if you're in a society where, say, half of the people are unemployed, and the other half are working and earning quite a lot of money, what is the point in giving the 50% who are still working money? What's the point in giving money to Bill Gates or Rupert Murdoch? So the universal bit is silly. Basic is the bigger problem, though. We don't want to live on a basic income. We want to live on a comfortable income. And at the moment, and who knows how it's going to work out in the future, it's very difficult to see how it's going to be paid for. It's very expensive. Tax is the only place that the money could come from. And I'm sure you've noticed that companies who generate an awful lot of the tax, they don't like paying tax. And neither do the rich people who have a lot of money. They squirrel it away in offshore banking jurisdictions. But as I say, the basic element of it is the real problem. People do not want to spend their lives in penury on a subsistence income. So how is it all going to pan out? Well, we don't know. This is guesswork. I mean, maybe the economists are right. Maybe there isn't going to be joblessness. Maybe there will be a magic jobs draw. But I don't think so. So I see four possible scenarios. The best one is the Star Trek economy, which is an economy in which machines are so fantastically efficient and effective that almost everything that they make, and they make almost everything, products and services, is virtually free. So you don't own a car, but when you want to take a journey, you just whistle, or you use your, probably inside your head, your descendant of your smartphone, to summon a self-driving car, an auto, and it takes you from A to B, and then off it goes and helps somebody else. So you never bother owning it, because why would you? And if you want a cup of coffee, or a house, or a pair of trousers, machines make it for you so cheaply that they're free. So that would be a solution. I don't think we're going to get there in 20 years or so, though. So the second scenario is generous Google, which is the AI giants are making huge amounts of money, and they all decide to be very generous, rather than allowing half the population to starve, which wouldn't be very good for them, because we'd all have pitchforks and we'd be attacking them. They agree to pay massive amounts of tax so that everybody has a nice, comfortable middle-class income. Maybe. Third scenario is what I call survivalism. Society breaks down, and there are just isolated pockets of survivors, basically rich people who've got very well-fortified bunkers. And then the fourth scenario, which I think is really quite likely, is fascism. People see joblessness coming, they panic, and they vote for some incredibly dictatorial regime which just suppresses all opposition and somehow manages to play everybody off against each other and keep order and probably start some wars. So a couple of happy scenarios and a couple of unhappy scenarios. And as you can tell, I'm a cheerful, optimistic sort of fellow. So I think we've got about a 50% chance of ending up in the happy column. What really worries me is I think there's going to be a panic. And if it doesn't happen sooner, I think it will happen in about 10 years. Because by then, most drivers will be unemployed. And everybody else will look at the drivers and say, wow, this stuff is real. The economists were wrong. And so I'm going to be unemployed in 5 years, or 10 years, or 15 years. And then they'll panic. Now, we've seen recently what happens when people get scared and angry. They vote for President Pinocchio. If people really, really panic because they think they're all going to be unemployed in half a decade or so, then it's pretty scary to think what might happen next. So we need our political and business leaders to work out what they would do. We don't know what's going to happen, but what they would do if we found ourselves heading towards this jobless society. They need a plan. So that when, in 10 years' time, all the people look at the drivers and say, wow, that's me, the politicians say, don't worry, we've got a plan. And we are a clever little mammal. There's 7 billion of us. We really should be able to figure this out. We've got a bit of time, maybe 10 years, but we haven't got time to waste. And the economists are probably the most dangerous profession in the world, because the reverse Luddite fallacy is very dangerous. The reverse Luddite fallacy is lulling politicians, and to a lesser extent business leaders. I find business leaders are actually much more open to these ideas than politicians. The economists are lulling the politicians into a false sense of security because they're saying, don't worry, it can't happen. There will be new jobs. And I know this because I talk to politicians in the UK and other places who are working on the implications of AI. And they're smart people, and they're well-meaning people. But they just don't really take seriously the idea that we could be heading towards a majorly jobless world. So in the traffic light threat situation, or threat analysis, I give the economic singularity a red, because it's coming pretty soon, and we're not paying enough attention to it. So you've got 1 amber and 1 red. Now, these challenges, the economic singularity and the technological singularity, fall to these 2 generations. My generation was the baby boomers, and the generation that came after us, they didn't really do very much. They got known as Generation X because nobody really knew what they were about. And then along came the Millennials, who are obviously Generation Y, born in the years up to the early 2000s, and then people born after the early 2000s, or from 2000 onwards, are Generation Z. And let's hope that's not prophetic. In fact, I think it probably is prophetic, and I'm going to just go slightly crazy here. I think Generation Z is probably the last generation of normal humans. If we get to the technological singularity, it's unlikely that humans will remain normal, unaugmented humans. After that, we will probably become post-human. So one way or another, Generation Z is probably the last generation of humans. Let's hope it's in a good way. And let's hope that these 2 generations, and I know I'm referring to many of you in the room who will be in Generation Y, let's hope they and you are capable and ambitious, because these are very serious challenges. Good luck. Dziękuję bardzo. Is that right?